Hello, I'm Dr. Sharon Spring. I teach anatomy and physiology, and today we're going to be dissecting the sheep eye. Hello, we're going to begin our sheep eye dissection. Of course, you should have a dissecting pan, you should have gloves, and your dissection kit. When we begin, we want to note that the sheep eye still has its eyelashes and all of the fat and fascia and the muscles attached to the back. So what we need to do is we need to dissect this down so that we can find the objects that we're looking for. The first object that we're looking for is the optic nerve, which is the beginning of cranial nerve number 2, which is for vision. So when we're doing our dissection, we have to be very careful not to cut that. As you see, we've got a lot of muscles in here. We have a lot of fat in here. So you have to be careful in locating that optic nerve. The best way to do it is just to get in there with your fingers and feel around, because the optic nerve is very hard in texture compared to the muscles and the fat. So there it is right there. As we do that dissection, we need to be very careful not to cut it. It's very easy to accidentally slice it off. So be careful as you cut around it. Try not to cut into the eyeball, because if you cut into the eyeball, the internal fluids will leak out, and we don't want that to happen, because those are other structures that we're going to be looking for today. So you cut around that optic nerve so you can see it very clearly, and then continue cutting simply with the scissors, or what I call finger dissection, where you just get in and just rip the tissues like you do with chicken in your kitchen. So as we get that dissected down, our final product should look like this, where we have a very clean eyeball, and we can see these structures very easily on the back, and here's our optic nerve. I do want you to note this fat that we have behind the eye. We have a fat pad back here. And when you see a person who's in later stage cancer or has AIDS or is anorexic, you might note that their eyes look sunken back in their heads, and that's because they've utilized that fat for energy. When we get into this eyeball here, we want to do a coronal cut. We want to cut the piece into anterior and posterior sections. You want to use a very sharp blade for this, and you need to be very careful because it will sometimes squirt out at you. So you use the sharp part of the scalpel. Do not use the flat edge. You want to puncture that eyeball, and of course some liquid's going to come out, and you just want to start cutting around and cut all the way around that eyeball so that we can then divide it into anterior and posterior segments. Here I have a dissected eye, and what we're looking for in this eye, as we move that anterior piece aside, we're going to note this hard structure inside of this goopy stuff that looks like the inside of a green grape. Take that out, and you put that in your hand, and what we're looking at, this hard ball right here, is the lens of the eye. It's the lens of the eye. If you want, you can feel free to go ahead and dissect that. But we'll move on to the next structure. This is called Vitreous Humor, and as I said, this has the texture of the inside of a green grape. Vitreous Humor is in the back of your eye, and what you have in your eye right now is what you had the day that you were born. You will never have any more. So if you ever have anything stuck in your eye, don't pull it out. Go to the hospital, let them remove it, because if you pull it out, this could leak out of your eye, and you cannot replace that. The fluid in the anterior part of the eye is called aqueous humor. And aqueous humor is constantly being made and drained off and recycled. Vitreous humor is not. What you had when you were born is all you're going to have. Now I want you to get into the back of the eye, and when we look at the back of the eye here, this posterior part of the eye, we see this really beautiful bluish, blackish, shiny structure in the back. This is called tapetum lucidum. Human beings do not have that. Only sheep have that, or only animals have that. That gives animals the ability to see at nighttime. So when they jump in front of your car and you see their eyes shining back at you at nighttime, it's that tapetum lucidum that is shining back at you. Now just take your finger and start pulling on that. It'll come off. It feels kind of like that tin foil that's on gum wrapping, and just pull that out of there. It's very easy to just peel like wallpaper. So that's the tapetum lucidum, very beautiful. Background of the eye, here's the back of the eye. We will find a structure called the optic disc. It's easier to feel it than it is to see it. So what you want to do is you want to look for that optic nerve on the other side, and this one's been cut a little bit. We've got the optic nerve on the other side. And we put our finger in the back of the eye and we feel around. We'll feel a hard structure. And we're going to dissect a little bit more, and we should find a little circle in there. There's a very little circle right here at the tip of this probe, and that is the head of the optic nerve. That's the beginning of cranial nerve 2. It's also called your blind spot. So in review, we've got the optic disc, which is the head of the optic nerve. Here's our optic nerve. This is not called the optic disc. The optic disc is only the beginning of it in the back of the eye. If we're looking at the external eyeball, then it's called the optic nerve. This is cranial nerve number 2. We also saw tapetum lucidum. Of course, that's an animal structure, not a human structure. Vitreous humor. And the lens. And that will be all for today's dissection. Thank you.